This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live.
Hello and welcome to the Wednesday Twilight Show with me, Hannah Wilson. Tonight I'm being joined by Ben West, who will be talking about suicide for mental health support for children. We will be discussing different strategies and things that we can do to make a difference to our students. He's an award-winning campaigner and author and TV
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and you are listening live. Tune in live at ttradio.org, or to join in the conversation, download the Podbean app and search Teachers Talk Radio. Follow the hashtag TTRadio. Tune in, talk it out with Teachers Talk Radio.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishing professional development books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Have you checked out their latest releases? Use the code JCTTR2324 for 20% off your order. Don't miss out. Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading.
In today's educational environment, students and teachers are juggling a mix of face-to-face, online and blended learning courses. Canvas by Instructure helps teachers navigate these diverse learning experiences with a user-friendly virtual learning environment that offers flexible access to courses and a consistent learning experience, all while streamlining everyday teaching processes. The world's best schools and universities are using Canvas to create dynamic courses, collaborate seamlessly, and access actionable data that drives student success.
On the 24th to the 26th of January 2024, Bet UK is back, and even better for educators. New for 2024, Table Talks empowers educators to collaborate openly and connect deeply with like-minded individuals in the education space, as well as tech user labs, the brilliant new tutorials and working groups at BET, where technology users will learn how to get more out of their institution's tech from the top education technology experts in the world. Whatever your goal, you'll find it at BET 2024. Educators go free. Get your tickets today at www.uk.betshow.com/visitor-registration.
Good evening and welcome on this Wednesday evening. Ben, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you. Can you hear me okay, Hannah?
I can. Thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, thanks for having me on.
I've wanted to kind of host this show for a long time, but for me it was finding the right person to come and chat with me about it. So I really appreciate you doing it, because it's not the easiest of topics, but I think it's something that's really important to chat about, and I think it's something that's becoming more prevalent in schools as well. From my own experience, I had a student in lockdown commit suicide. She was 15, and it happened in the summer, so it happened in August. But actually, a little while before that, she came into school and thanked all the teachers, and she seemed like in a positive place. But now reflecting on it, she was actually coming and kind of saying goodbye.
Wow.
And again, it was one of those that we, looking at the evidence, kind of she was referred for help quite a long time beforehand and just didn't get it in time, which is why I'm quite passionate about this. But tell everyone who's listening a little bit about yourself, because you're not a teacher. I've brought you in from the outside to the teaching world, because you hello?
Oh, hello. Sorry, I think I just you just cut off the end of your thing. Sorry. Yes, thank you for having me. I'm very pleased to be in the teaching world for an hour. No, really good. And I'm really sorry to hear about what happened with your student. That's so sad, and obviously quite sad for me to hear the other side of that story, because I was sort of on the other side. My story starts in 2017 when my younger brother Sam was diagnosed with clinical depression, and he was 15. He was in year 11, and then he struggled on for 3 months, and then sadly died from suicide in January 2018. So just a few months before his GCSEs. I was 17 when it happened, so I was just in year 12, so just starting A levels, and it was just absolutely it was horrendous, absolutely horrendous. I mean, the first sort of initial aftermath was just absolutely horrible. You know, grief, trauma. I was unfortunate in that I found him alongside my mum, so that brought an enormous amount of trauma and pain from that. But actually, going forward from that, I realised quite quickly, actually, within the first few weeks, that almost everyone I knew at school had something that was going on that they weren't really being very open about. And they, I had people come up to me and talk about diagnosis of anorexia, eating disorders, people telling me they'd been self-harming all the time. People telling me that they'd attempted suicide before and never told anyone. And I sort of took a step back, and I was like, this thing that I'd never really spoken about with anyone before, I'd never really heard of before, mental health, suicide, depression, eating disorder, all this stuff, suddenly was absolutely everywhere around me. And it was quite scary, given what I'd just gone through. And so, yeah, that was 2018, all of that happened. It's now 2023. I've been doing this for 6 years. I'm trying my best to help out where I can. And if that's working with government on policies in the past and trying to improve access to education for children around mental health, but also support for teachers, and then also campaigning around universities and NHS support. I'll do what I can, because I think it's so sad that so many students do face such a massive amount of pain, and unfortunately, because of the world we live in, the society we live in, there really is such a lack of access to treatment, and schools are in this really unique position where they are picking up a lot of the slack that on the NHS isn't, and that's quite a unique situation to be in. Not often do you get the schools pick up what is basically a healthcare problem. So I'm really passionate about helping people that were in Sam's position. I really think that Sam should still be around today, and if he was around today, he'd be doing what I'm doing now. So I'm incredibly passionate about trying to help, particularly young people, get through the various struggles, but everyone get through life. Because I think everyone can and deserves to be happy and not have to face the darkness that comes with mental illness. And we can do more to prevent that and treat people and destigmatize the whole thing. So anyway, thank you for having me on. I'm really looking forward to our conversation, because I think you're right. It's not something that's talked about enough in teaching, in schools, and it's something that I think is a really, really, really important conversation to be having.
Because statistically, it's quite a daunting thing. I was looking through it, and I can't find anything overly regularly, which I find quite interesting in itself as well, that there's not kind of any recent news articles about children's mental health, but it definitely, all of the earlier ones suggest that it's only going to get worse in COVID. And I wonder whether people are kind of, that's going to come out sooner rather than later. But they say about 7% of children, so this was written in February 2021 by The Guardian, and they said that about 7% of children have attempted suicide by the age of 17, and almost 1 in 4 say they have self-harmed in the past year. And that's just quite an outstanding kind of number of children. That's 1 in 4. That's quite a considerable amount of my class that will have self-harmed by the time that they're 17. And obviously there's the ones that we know that it's very visible in schools, I would say, at the moment. Yeah. You can very much see it on them where they've self-harmed. They're not shy, they're not hiding it, some of them, but there obviously are the ones that are doing it in private and doing it in other ways that aren't so visible. So it's really difficult, because the ones you can see, they're easier to help, but they're also, if they're showing it that badly, they're in quite a bad way that they really need that help. It is a cry for help. It is them trying to get attention. But it's just really difficult. And I don't think, as schools, obviously we're trained in looking for kind of the issues and looking for different types of abuse that children are experiencing and
Yep.
trauma and things like that. But we're not really given a huge amount of tools, and certainly not regularly enough, in my opinion, of how to deal with that and cope with that. We have an amazing team in schools with people that they can go talk to. We have a safe space and things like that. And obviously there's Kooth and things that they can, the free app that they can log on and talk to somebody. So there's lots of tools out there. But as teachers in the classroom, we're probably spending quite a lot of time with these students, but we're not actually I feel like it should be more of a whole school effort, as opposed to it's that person over there's job to deal with all of those kids. And the lady who does deal with them in my school, oh my gosh, I have such respect to her, but she is exhausted on her knees at this point in the year, with there's the huge number of children with kind of different mental health issues, is just staggering. Because I know you've been kind of you had a petition, didn't you, about going to Parliament, and you met Boris Johnson. I imagine that's a very interesting experience.
Yes, it was.
But what do you want to see change and the government do differently?
Look, I think you've absolutely hit the nail on the head when you're talking about self-harm, and I'll tell you why. Because self-harm is seen as a really confusing aspect for people that don't understand. It can be really scary. People don't really understand it, and as a teacher, when you see that in the classroom, there's probably, and this is talking obviously as a non-teacher, so you can maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but it's probably quite scary to get involved in, because it feels like quite a big deal. And if you're not equipped with the tools to actually approach that and know how to interact with that student in the right way, actually what happens is, and what I've heard from people I've worked with, is actually you sort of don't want to say the wrong thing, so you try and say nothing at all, and hope that someone else picks it up. And that goes for not just teachers, but actually most people, right? Even if it's friends and family members, we tend to ignore things like that. Self-harm actually is when you start talking to psychotherapists and professionals, it's actually a very treatable thing, right? It's basically someone that is, you're right, it's labeled as attention seeking. It's certainly trying to get attention, it's trying to get help, but actually it's a coping mechanism, and actually causing that physical pain. It releases dopamine in the brain. We can track the whole neural pathway that it does make the person feel good. And what happens is, and I work with a psychologist who's been working in clinical psychology for 20 years, and he gets a lot of self-harming patients referred to him. And if you can work with that patient to come up with different strategies that give that dopamine release, and for example, if it's art or it's like going for a walk and all these things that we talk about so often, if you can really give the patient those options and really allow them to invest in finding different ways that give them the same feeling, he's never had a patient that has relapsed into self-harm after going through treatment and finding something that works instead. So it's incredibly treatable. And this is sort of the crux for everything I'm about with schools and with teachers particularly, because, and you mentioned there sort of a lack of tools and my petition to government. So anyway, when Sam died, I was talking to a lot of the teachers that I was at school with, and realised exactly that they didn't really understand they're very difficult, complex topics. And because of that lack of understanding and the lack of knowledge and tools that they've been given to help, there was a very standoff approach of not wanting to get involved. I need to add, is like from a good place of not wanting to make it worse, right? Because you don't want to say the wrong thing. And anyway, I absolutely stand by the fact that I think you're right. Teachers need to be given this education, because exactly how you said about your student that you unfortunately lost in lockdown, this is not going away. It's not going to change. And it's certainly not something you can avoid if you're working in schools. So we need to do everything we can to prepare teachers to have those conversations and spot those signs. And that is exactly what my petition was calling for when I started it back in 2019. It was to make mental health first aid a compulsory part of teacher training. And if you're a teacher, you'll, I'm sure, be aware of mental health first aid. It seems to be everywhere and everyone talks about it. But basically, at the time when I did it, and I believe still now, the government's official target or goal in terms of mental health with schools is to have one lead mental health first aid or one mental health lead in every school in the UK. And to me, just as you said, that strikes me as absolutely bizarre, because you have one teacher in a school that's meant to look out for and safeguard all these people from that with their mental health. It doesn't make sense. I worked with a school in North London. It's got 1,500 kids. I mean, there's no way that one person can deal with that. And just like these basic safeguarding, the basic safeguarding training that teachers are required to have, I absolutely fundamentally believe that teacher training needs to include at least some sort of basic level training in terms of mental health of students, because it's these signs and self-harm and all these signs that you can look out for, and the understanding of how you might interact with a student that is displaying those signs, and how you might then approach them and have a conversation with them and open that conversation. It's really, really important. And I can pull up the stats of first aid versus mental health first aid, and you've got, we all make it clear that everyone should have the basic knowledge of how to use an EpiPen in case there's an anaphylactic shock in a classroom from a student with a severe nut allergy, for example, right? That's great that we have that level of training and that sort of basic safeguarding training. But every year there is 1,900 I think it's 14 to 18-year-olds that are hospitalised for anaphylactic shock. In the same year, in the same age group, there's 19,000 14 to 18-year-olds who are hospitalised for intentional self-harm or self-poisoning. So it feels like we need to also be doing the work, trying to create schools that really focus on training teachers, giving you guys the tools that you need to actually recognise when it's going wrong in a classroom and intervene. And unfortunately, that's the position we're in, because you're right. There are so many people that are unwell, and we know that from a clinical point of view, if someone's referred to CAMHS now, they're going to be waiting quite a long time. The earlier we can get them on that sort of conveyor belt of support, then the better. So we need a sort of whole school approach, and actually a whole society approach, to pick up on signs really, really early, get people onto the right support pathway. And then we know from evidence that the result is usually much, much better than if it was to wait and end up in crisis point. And that's not to say there's also issues to solve with the NHS, but I feel like we need to sort schools out, so give you all the training that you need, and then go from there. And I did meet Boris, and he hasn't done anything, so that's fun.
At least you can say you met him. That's
Yeah,
Lydia's
true.
written in. She said I fully agree that teachers need more training. On the flip side, it is right for teachers to pick up on the slack of the funding of the NHS and CAMHS, where it's still an over a year waiting list. I worry too much that is being placed on teachers as being added to their expertise, taking away from them doing their job, is a huge problem. What extent do teachers actually have time to carry any of support for the students? Because that's the thing. If we see anything that's happening with a student and we're worried about it, we call what it used to be called a nagging doubt form, but now it's like there's different systems like CPOMs and stuff, and you kind of write in like, oh, I noticed this kid didn't eat and had commented that they didn't eat this morning. I'm one of those teachers. I always have extra breakfast bars in my bag, and I like if a kid accidentally drops into my conversation, which they quite often do, I think they know I have them. I will be like, have my bar, is fine. And it's funny what you said before, because I'm an art teacher, and I had a kid actually write me a Christmas card a couple of years ago, and she was in quite a dark place, and she hated coming to school, and was like, she used to lock herself in the toilet and not want to come out all day. And I slowly would stand outside and coax her in, and she wrote me this Christmas card that said, kind of, I was in a really, really dark place, I didn't want to be here, but coming to school and having your lessons made me happy, and I found myself and I became happy again. I got out of the dark because I had your lessons to focus on. And I think sometimes it's we teach so many kids, but we forget what an impact we can have on like certain little pockets of things. And I find it like I think that the reason I do quite a lot of after school clubs, and the kids kind of hang out and then they let things slip because they're a little bit more relaxed and it's slightly a more intimate environment where they can disclose stuff. But I also think there's that thing that I've always learned with teaching is to kind of humanize myself rather than being this authority figure. I'll let them in on things in my life. Like I'm like, I had a bit of a horrific last year. I broke one foot. 6 months later, I broke the other foot, and then I got a DVT and a pulmonary embolism. But I would be like, I'm really struggling. I can't work out. Like, that's how I de-stress. Or I'm having to go for a walk. Nothing can be like made worse by a walk. And kind of, expressing, that's the only way I can think to help these kids is to kind of express the ways that I de-stress, to try and give them other coping mechanisms. But I mean, I'm very much have looked into everything, because my niece is 15 and going through it quite badly at the moment. She well, actually it was more last year. She's a lot better this year. She has a medical condition with her lungs, which means her life expectancy's been shortened, and she was constantly in and out of hospital. And because she wasn't in control, self-harming was something that she could control. So for her it was getting that control back. And she's, I mean, kind of like that idea, like, what's the point of going on, because I'm not going to live that long anyway. And it's really hard, but I kind of having those walks and those chats and kind of explaining difficulties that I've been through in my life made her realize that she wasn't on her own. And also that kind of thing of that resilience, like whatever doesn't kill you makes you stronger, and you can, if you can survive this, you can survive anything. And that kind of, that you go from that thing of wanting to end it to then feeling invincible, which is quite nice. But I don't know how to kind of get that into kind of into education a bit more. Like, there obviously are PSHE chats and things, but it's very, very light and surface level. I don't think we go deep enough to actually kind of make it feel heard to the students.
I completely agree, and I think that's the second part of this, is how do we actually give them the right education and what helps, because you don't want to present it in a way that's going to use a not a great word, but like to make it unsexy, right? And sort of make people feel like it's always a bit boring, right? And you need it to be like, oh, this is really like, this is like the walk thing, because I feel like at school I remember having one sort of, I had an external speaker come in and talk about mental health once, and it just sort of lost the room a little bit. And as I've grown up, I love going for walks and being among nature, and it's actually something I found absolutely amazing. And it's just how do you sort of introduce that and make it cool and make it trendy and make it something that people are going to want to listen to. But just to come back quickly to what Lydia said, I absolutely agree. I think it's I'd hate for a situation to create teachers having to be jack of all trades, and they already are. I mean, you're sort of, safeguarding has become this massive thing, and you've got to look out for almost everything from extremism to abuse to eating properly to mental health, to all these things, and to an extent, it's not really the job title. The job title is teaching, not having to look out for all these things. So that's a massive issue that I'm really conscious of. And also, let's face it, it's a really stressful job. And the more you add to it, the more time you've got to spend doing stuff, and you don't have the time to be spending doing particular things. So I completely agree that like the peripheral stuff to a school needs to get better. And I know that the rollout of mental health teams, NHS mental health teams, I've heard some really good things about how they've been working with schools. I'd love to hear if anyone's had experience working with a mental health team or has been assigned a mental health team. I'd like to hear about that, because apparently, according to someone I've worked with, it's turned what has been in the past like a 6-month, 3-month waiting list for someone that's deemed suicidal. They've managed to get support for a student within a matter of days on the NHS, which is sort of allowed the school to sort of almost use them as their mental health tool, and that goes straight to like fast track through to CAM support, and they've got an assigned psychotherapist through the NHS for the school, and it almost sounds like that's what's needed to be rolled out sooner. And with their target, the government's target was 30% coverage by 2025, so it's almost offensive how small the ambition is there. But from what I've heard, it's worked really well, because we don't want a situation where schools and teachers are having to take up the slack of a NHS on its knees when it comes to mental health. So stuff like that I think is really, really beneficial. And then also I think we need to get to a point where we're sort of teaching young people and students about this stuff at a really early age. I know I've worked with schools and had conversations with schools in the past about sort of mental health training and mental health education for students, and particularly like primary age. And I'm sometimes met with, oh, but they're too young to be talking about that. They're too young to be, talk to about depression, anxiety, and what is mental health. But actually, you know, I've worked with a psychologist recently, one of the questions I asked her was, what's your youngest patient? And she said she had a 3-year-old who was self-harming with a rubber. I mean, these are not issues that are unique to adults. I do think this education actually really needs to start early on. And so I know of someone that's written children's books that are all about dealing with emotions and going from literally 4 to 5 to 6 years old, early key stages, really teaching about mental health, well-being, emotions, you know, looking after your friends, talking, walking, nature, all of this stuff from an early age. So you're learning about it when you're learning to read and write, which I think is really the way we need to go forward, and almost embed that education all the way through. But then we bring up a whole new issue, which is that PHHE is becoming the sort of jack of all trades for that sort of external, less subject specific topics like sex ed and mental health and all the other things at home, economics, and all the other things that you can bundle into it. And that again is like a massive pressure for schools, and quite difficult to fit everything into one potentially 1 hour every week to cover all these things that the government keeps throwing at schools to teach about.
Yeah, it didn't even used to be that. They've now put that in as a compulsory thing, that it has to be an hour. But it's so much to get in, and it's so hard to picture because you've got such different kids as well. But like I said, I'm a mum of a 6-year-old, and I'm very much aware of kind of his mental health, and very much he'll already at 6 tell me that he has tummy ache, and that means that he's anxious about something. And then I'll kind of probe him, like, well, are you sad? Are you worried? And then he'll kind of tell me. But it took me quite a little while to realise that actually he didn't just have tummy ache. He was actually telling me that he was anxious. So they really do start young, and I think it's kind of also that whole understanding. We're very much a nation that is you bottle it up, and you get on with it. That we kind of need to let children know that it's okay to feel, it's okay to sit in those feelings. And actually, I've had that conversation with my family when I've been upset about something. They're like, "Oh, well, there's worse people than you, and you just got to get on with it." And it's like, no. I just need to vent, and I need to sit in it, and I need to feel it, and then I'll be fine. But I need to not shut it off. And I think we're so quick to do that, and then it all piles in and piles in and piles in, and you never deal with it. Quite often we talk to the kids about kind of our buckets and this idea that we fill the bucket. But if we kind of give too much to everybody else and everything else, we're not kind of dealing with it, and we overflow, and that's what we kind of can't cope with. But we need to have outlets to kind of manage it. And I think that's quite a nice way, a visual way of kind of explaining it. But I don't think we go really beyond that with the students in terms of really getting them to think about how they can manage their mental health. And I love the idea the people that come in and do what they were called you said there was a target for 30% of them to go into school by 2025.
Yeah, it's the mental health teams.
Mental health teams, they sound amazing. That should be 100%.
Yeah,
because
it is exactly. Yeah,
it is so tough, and I think that's the problem with teachers as well, is that we're struggling. My sister's a Senko, and she's had kids that are really, really struggling with mental health. Some of them have been violent, and they've been waiting ages and ages and ages to see CAMS. Finally see CAMS. The kid swears at them. They say they're not going to deal with them anymore and send them back and tell them the school to deal with them. So there's that issue as well, is that we kind of support them, and then they finally get there after all that wait, and then they're not kind of looked after in the right way either. So I think it's one of those, as teachers, we always feel that our opinion isn't necessarily valid, but actually if there's that mental health support that can kind of get that quicker route into it, and be like, these students need help. I mean, I've already this year had students with quite difficult situations that have had police in and stop them from harming, and had to tackle them, and they're back in school, and we have to deal with those students every day, and we have to consider how to keep them safe every day. But that's just one student, and it's like this idea that it's the idea that it's 1 in 4, like so many more than what we think it is, and how can we protect them is really, really difficult.
That is difficult. That is really difficult. And so just on your what you said about spending time with your thoughts, and having, like, emotions aren't the enemy, and it's great to spend time with them. I read a study. They did a study recently where they gave adults the option of spending 5 minutes alone with their thoughts or receiving an electric shock, and I think it was 95% chose to have the electric shock. Because we're especially British people, we don't like sitting with our own thoughts. I mean, we fill our days and fill our time with doing other stuff. And even when we're not doing anything, we're reading a book or watching TV or listening to a podcast, listening to the radio. And we're sort of trying to escape those moments we have alone. And I think that's really the big thing about it. And I was taught by a counsellor of mine. She was just like, what are you doing to look after yourself? And I sort of listed all the things. I was like, oh, I'm going for a run, I'm doing this, I'm sort of, I might do whatever, right? And she was just like, we are human beings, Ben, not human doings. And sometimes the best way to process all the stuff that's going on is to actually not do, it's actually just be. And all that sounds really like spiritual and a bit, a bit strange. It's actually so true. Like, emotions and feelings, they're there because your brain is trying to process an event, and it's trying to make you feel so you can process it and sort of file that thought and that feeling away and take the heat out of the experience. And the only way we actually get through those experiences and get through those emotions and process them is by feeling them. But unfortunately, we're so find it so difficult to experience those, and so difficult to feel things, and so difficult to actually sit with thoughts, that a lot of those feelings don't really properly get filed away, and they just build and build and build. And we do live in a world where it's not trendy to talk about emotions. It's not cool to sort of to sit and think about things. We're students will go home and they'll have access to TikTok and Instagram and all this stuff that's trying to steal their attention. And you can do anything but actually think about your emotions, and that's the difficult thing. It's like trying to find the persuasion there to actually let them have some time. And just on sort of Sam's point of view and in all of this as well, I remember he was diagnosed with depression, clinical depression, when he was 15 at school. And we never really spoke about it to each other. I never really asked him about it. He never brought it up with me. He was incredibly embarrassed by having depression. He was incredibly embarrassed because he felt very weird. All he wanted more than anything was to fit in and have his thing and have his group. And I don't think he ever felt like he fitted in. And then suddenly this diagnosis came along, and he just felt so embarrassed by it. And so he was really passionate about talking about it, talking about depression, the fact that everyone, so many people have it, almost everyone struggles in some way. And I think so much of what schools can do is actually just normalize the fact that this goes on. I had no idea going through school that so many people are really struggling. Sam had no idea that so many people at school were also really struggling. And it's quite ironic, what we think makes us different, going through depression, going through periods of eating, difficulty with eating, and all sorts, whatever you're dealing with, we think it makes us different, but it actually makes us the same. And I look back and I think how sad it is that he felt so embarrassed by something that almost everyone was going through at school. And unfortunately, no one really spoke about it, and no one really spoke about the fact that so many people were going through it. And I think actually a place that teachers and schools and education and PSHE can play is just actually normalizing the fact that so many people are going through it, because a lot of these children are struggling with the fact that actually they probably feel quite weird, and they probably feel like they're broken or have something wrong that's different to other people, and probably feel like they've been dealt an unfair hand that other people haven't. And that makes me quite sad. And I think there's a real point to go and say, we can normalize this and show people that actually they're not weird for going through stuff like this. It's an illness like anything else. And people can help, and there's help available. Obviously with the NHS it does take some time, but yeah, I think it's important to sort of make people realize that you're not broken for having depression, and it's not broken to have things going on at home or any of this. And on the NHS, I mean, you told that story of of going all that way and then, you know, being swearing and then being told you're not allowed to have treatment and you're sort of back to school. I remember being told a story from someone from an A&E doctor that said they had a young person present with really, really bad social anxiety to the point where they were, you know, wouldn't go out, terrified of school, missing school. And they were referred through to CAMS, and CAMS, after assessments and all sorts, offered them group therapy. And because she turned it down, she was told she wasn't allowed to access support on the NHS because she turned down treatment. And so we've got to do so much. We've got to do so much to employ people into the NHS to improve access. Because I saw a message just go up there, a comment saying, you know, there needs to be sort of like a triage and that sends it straight from school to the NHS. In a perfect world, that's exactly what would happen. In a perfect world, schools would educate about coping mechanisms, educate about what this stuff is, and teachers would be able to pick up early on signs and triage them through a mental health lead and straight into an NHS mental health team, and then they get treatment that they need whilst they're continuing with school. That's the absolute perfect situation. But we've got a long way to go before that. And a lot of money needs to be invested into the NHS and schools actually to make that happen.
Because that's my opinion, that if you put the money and invest it into schools, it will relieve the tension into education, into the NHS. But it's just finding the time. But it is that thing of they feel like they're the only one and they're abnormal for feeling how they feel. Yeah. But actually, it's not even a case of will you feel like that. It's a case of when you feel like that. Like everyone will feel like that at some point in their life. So it is a life skill that we're kind of not delivering properly to these students. And it's the idea that, and I think that's the thing as well, we quite often do a mental health assembly like before exams and kind of like, this is how you cope with stress. And actually it needs to be more regularly, because they might not be stressed at that point, but they will be stressed at a later point. Exactly, and there'll be points where their mental health will be up and down. And actually, if they have the right assembly at the right time, then there might be like, oh, okay, that's what I need to do. And it might prevent it, as opposed to being this kind of one day, once a year, or that one time, that other time. Yeah. It needs to be a more continuous string through education, I think.
Definitely, 100%. And also, I remember when we had our one talk about mental health, I think it was a Wednesday afternoon, and the following Wednesday in the same slot there was like a 2-hour thing about French pantomime. So that's where it got filed away in my head of like a level of importance. It was like on the same level as French pantomime. I was like, oh, mental health, French pantomime, fine. And it sort of needs to be really important. And unfortunately, like it's one of those things that can slip away. You know, someone's mentioned there that some schools still don't have mandated time for PSHE. It sort of feels like in the current setup that it's the second most important thing. When, you know, I work with companies that employ people from school and whilst they're at school, and what we see is actually from an employability point of view, you know, they'd much rather employ someone that's coming to them with fantastic coping skills, that's mentally healthy, that's thinking really clearly and coming to them like that, but that's potentially not, I don't know, doesn't know the quadratic formula, for instance, then employ someone that is actually, you know, working at 50% because they are burnt out and struggling with stress. It's absolutely crucial that we teach people life skills like dealing with stress, because we're all going to face it. And you're right, everyone goes through breakups, people go through illness, people go through grief. You're going to face really, really significantly difficult issues in life. And we're setting people up to fail if we don't properly teach them how to navigate that. And actually, I was going to bring it on to your subject, art. It was Sam's favourite subject at school. He absolutely loved art. He was so talented at it, and he was also really talented at music. And he was doing. He was in year 10, so the year before GCSE, and the school dropped music and art they didn't have the budget for music or art. So I think it was sort of this perfect storm for Sam, where he felt a little bit different, and then the couple things that he enjoyed that were sort of his identity were dropped off the you know, he couldn't do them anymore. And I think that just sort of that really, really impacted him, if I'm being honest. His escape was art and music, but also it was what he was talented at. And by dropping them, what it did was make him feel like what he's good at really isn't important. So all these people he was around that were good at science and maths, that were doing really well at school, were suddenly thriving, and he was left not really doing. He really struggled with maths and English and science, but the thing he was good at was suddenly the least important subject that was dropped. And we know that art and music have massive benefits for people's mental health. So, I mean, I'm terrible, absolutely terrible at art, but I still occasionally try and do something creative because I do genuinely love it. But I felt like when they took away art, that really, and music, that really impacted him actually, because it was like I say, it was his thing, and basically it was the least important subject in the eyes of whoever it was at the time, Michael Gove maybe, probably, and so I guess, and even now we're hearing from Parliament that students have to study proper subjects, and further cuts to art and music at school, when actually, if anything, they should be the ones that we're developing as a tool to teach about stress, and teach about coping mechanisms, and actually use them as a sort of vehicle for this education. If PSHE isn't going to work, then use it as a sort of way of we're not just doing this subject for fun. Like we're developing your creative brain, and we're giving you a tool that you can use wherever you are to actually find some peace and some relaxation. Like, I think it's such a missed opportunity to use it. I don't know if you have any thoughts about that from your side, but I think it's a shame when it's cut off as if it's the least important subject, when actually I think it's one of the most important.
I could rant about this all day. There's actually a study released last year about the arts and the impact that it has, and actually that it does have a positive impact on students' mental health. They're also more likely to go into a job that they enjoy and have a better mental health, and less likely to access mental health support later in their life if they do an art subject. And also, it's one of the biggest creative industries in our country, and one of the biggest growing industries. So for me, it's that counterintuitive, like, actually we should be encouraging them. I've done a whole hour and a half on this, Ben, about kind of we need to encourage students into those creative subjects and those non-core subjects. There's too much pressure on kids to do well in English and maths and science, and this whole adding on the maths to 18. Like, the kids in year 7 are freaking out about that already, that are struggling with it. Yes, they need to have a GCSE in it, but they need to understand life skills like credit cards and how to pay it off, and how debt works, and how taxes work, and how mortgages work and things. But if they can do that and live. But it's better, surely. There's a lovely lady called Suzanne Cole, and she always rants about it. She always says it's much better to encourage students into a job that they love than to have a job that's about money. And this whole times rich lift, and it's like, if you become a solicitor, then you'll earn this much, or if you earn this much, these are the jobs that we need to push students into. And it's like, no, we should be pushing students into finding careers and subjects that they love and enjoy. And it shouldn't be that I had a student last year who was very, very academic, and he made me a whole afternoon tea from scratch for my leaving present. And he wrote me a little note that said, I picked photography as a DOS subject. I thought it would be a bit of light entertainment between my really, really heavy academic subjects. But actually, it was the place where I found myself. It's the place that I found my confidence. And it's become the thing that I look forward to and loved every week. So it's like that idea that even that it can have this real positive impact on somebody. And he's going on to be a primary school teacher, so I love that.
I love that.
But I think that I'm a bit of like, obviously I host a teaching podcast. I'm a very much teaching geek, but I was listening to Parliamentary Time the other week, and there's just no like mention of mental health and what they're going to change and what they're really going to do. It seems to be very low on the agenda. But it is like those that I know a school locally that they have a Wednesday morning, they have an hour and a half slot where the 7, 8s and 9s, so the Key Stage 3, can pick any subject that they like and go and have a bit of a club kind of activity. And I think that kind of thing should be encouraged more into curriculums, that they have this choice and they can go do something that they can enjoy midweek, kind of balances it out. On the other side, flip side, the Key Stage 4 students are doing extra English and maths, so it's like, wouldn't it be nice if they could do it as well? But I guess if they pick their subjects at that point, so they are having more hours in the subjects that they enjoy. But certainly there's a lot to be said for kind of trying to find the space for kids to be able to do that in school.
Yeah. I completely agree. And it's so interesting, isn't it? Because you sort of go through school and you go, I mean, I don't know about if you have these conversations with students, but I remember going to school and I work with someone that goes to schools quite a lot as a sort of external speaker. And she asked them like, oh, what do you want to do when you leave school? And these are sort of year 10, year 9 students. And they'll be like, oh, lawyer, doctor, engineer, like the carpenter, all these jobs that you sort of like you're exposed to, and then you sort of leave school and you go into the working world and you realize there's hundreds and thousands of jobs you've never even heard of before. And it's just so strange because you sort of have this, you're sort of told there's this career path and it's a lot about money, and you sort of have this quite small view of what is available out there. And you've got some incredible jobs, and you're right, creatively, it is an incredible talent to be able to be creative, and there's such a demand for creatives in almost everything. I mean, look around, like you can't go on the bus ads, every ad, and TV ads, radio ads, like design, literally everything you see in the world is created by someone, and we have such little passion for creating the next generation of creators. And you're right, let's face it, if you find something you love, you're going to be happy. And I think it's so important to allow children to find what they like to do and then empower them to actually pursue it. Photography is a great example, and it might not end up being a job, but if you find something you like, that's a gift, isn't it? To then be able to be like, at the weekend I'm going to go and do that because that's what I enjoy, and come back feeling refreshed and feeling like you've just gone and done something you love. And I think it's really sad, actually, how many people I speak to, and you ask them, like, what do you like doing? What do you enjoy? And it's sort of, movies, social media, and all of this stuff. And you're like, well, that's not hobbies. And I think actually a lot of the younger generation, particularly people I've sort of been in contact with, really struggle to tell you what hobbies they enjoy doing. And it's really sad. It's like I can list a few things that I like doing, and I've developed that and learned that, and sort of trial and error has found what I like doing. And even if I'm not very good at it, I still enjoy it. And we do have this situation where people really don't know particularly what they like doing. And you're right. I mean, talk about exam stress. I remember GCSEs. What is it, like 23 exams you've got to do or something ridiculous? And it's like this whole setup. I don't know what your perspective is on it as a teacher, but this idea that you work from I guess year 9 all the way through to year 11 and then you're assessed on all of that in about 2 months over GCSEs, and then you've got to do it all over again in another 2 years for A levels. That's an enormous amount of stress. And it's interesting to hear you say that even really small children are already worried about that, because it's incredibly daunting. When from my perspective, having been through all that, it seems pretty unnecessary that it's so stressful. It could be done in a way that's far less stressful than, here's an hour. If you don't pass this, you're going to have to reset the year. And that's an enormous amount of stress to put on someone that's brain isn't fully developed yet and won't be for another potentially 7-8 years.
And it is that at that point, if they're just ill or they have a bad night's sleep, like they're not going to produce their best results. I was really hoping with COVID, because COVID kind of moved to the way that art marks. So we mark everything. They have a 10-hour exam to prove that they can make the artwork and be secretly painting it at home. But we essentially mark it, and then a moderator comes in and picks 15 at random. And if our marks match theirs, they stick. And I was kind of hoping that it would go that way after COVID, that once they realised that actually teachers marking there and giving like a mark based on all the work they've done. I think as well, the way education's going, behaviour isn't overly great at the moment. That seems to be a general trend across all schools. And I think that actually if the students knew that their grades relied on their teacher, that they would have to behave. They would have to have a good relationship with that teacher. They would have to kind of work hard consistently, as opposed to kind of messing around and distracting other people's learning as well. It would potentially change kind of the school dynamic, but for a positive reason. And I think, when else do you go through that stress of an exam situation? You don't really. Unless you're going for something very, very specific. Generally, everything is very more on the job kind of style. So I do think that education needs to be changed, and it's the same as in terms of teacher mental health. Like, I know there's a big push at the moment to reform Ofsted, because we like the teacher stress of kind of that coming in is quite daunting. And although I'm love it, I'm like, send them to me. I'm not afraid of you. I think it's that whole building we've seen as teachers that since COVID there seems to be a lack of resilience in students, that it was one of those that they didn't have to sit the exams, they did fall on their feet and everything was fine. If they didn't go into school, nothing really happened. Granted, those kids that gamed all day every day and didn't interact with any of the home learning are now struggling and potentially behaving worse because they can't access the learning, because there's a real gap in year groups where the kids that did the work for a couple of years at home and the kids that didn't, there's a big kind of difference between them. And especially, I think also that kind of addicted to screens was kind of really increased in that time, and that kind of unrealistic expectations of what social media is versus what the real life is. And like you said, like, they don't really necessarily have as many hobbies as they did. Like, granted, I broke my first foot. I planned a surfing wellbeing session and broke my foot surfing. And the second one, I won a rock climbing experience that was not so lucky. But the kids love learning that I do those things in my spare time. So it's, and I think I've chatted about this before in terms of the schools outside of London, the kids didn't do as well in their GCSEs as others. And there's a lot of data that says the kids that do cultural capital kind of other activities, so do a club outside of school. If a kid does a club outside of school for 1 hour a week, it equates to the equivalent of a GCSE, because they gain more experience and social experiences and more cultural kind of exposure. And I think it's that thing of, since COVID, a lot of funding's been cut, so there's not as many clubs or opportunities for students, especially those from disadvantaged backgrounds. And then add to that the fact that there's also a lot of cuts to transport. So these kids are kind of, especially rural kids, they're stuck in a place and they can't get out, they can't get anywhere, they can't do anything. Like, majority of our kids are all bussed into school. So they just, unless somebody's going to drive them there, but their parents are all working extra hours and stuff, and there's that lack of opportunity to do those things. And I think that's having an impact on their mental health as well. They haven't got that club to go and de-stress and learn and build those connections with other people. They're just going home and building connections with a world that doesn't really exist. So I think we'll see the impact of that more and more. But yeah, I don't know. I don't think the government's going to fix that one anytime soon.
Oh, I know, it's a nightmare, and it doesn't feel like it's on the. It's crazy, because I've worked with a few politicians, unfortunately, and you sort of have these conversations with them, and they seem like they get it, and they seem like it's a priority. And every mental health awareness day, they churn out this stuff about it being a priority. But you listen, like you did, to Prime Minister's questions and all of this, and it just falls to the wayside, and you're like, well, is it really as much a priority as everyone is making out to be? I remember I watched, so I was quite involved in, and still am actually involved in, sort of university mental health support, and that's all a whole nother situation. Anyway, that was a mess during COVID. I was at uni during COVID, and that was just awful, actually, really awful. And there was this a session in Parliament after COVID, and it was titled lessons learned in higher education since COVID-19. And so I went along and I was like, oh, this would be interesting, because it'll be hopefully some cool, like, good stuff about mental health in there. And mental health got one mention in the whatever hour and a half that it was, and then the rest of the time it was spent on funding for extra stuff that they needed. which probably all goes to buildings and things. And it strikes me so weird how we've got this real problem, and if we solve this problem, we're going to unlock billions from the economy. Not that that's the aim at all, but unlock billions from the economy. We're going to save lives, no doubt. We're going to increase people's happiness level, satisfaction with life. We're going to make more creative people, make more people that, and you're like, if we really addressed this and solved it, we'd have such an amazing population in this country that loved life. And isn't that such an incredible thing? And it just feels like every time it's brought up, it's like the least important subject in the room. Like people roll their eyes at it. And it's really sad. And obviously, both of us have been on the other end of it, which is a tragedy, and that's extremely sad. But we do need commitment from funding. We need commitment to funding the NHS. We need innovative solutions with schools. I know I work with Dr. Alex George. I know he's just had his funding for early support hubs signed off, which is great. So they're rolling out on a trial. That's great. That's giving early access to children and young people to have support without a referral, which is great. I work with a great charity called Beyond that runs a mental health festival every year for schools. Again, brilliant. They give free resources to schools, award money to schools for this sort of stuff. But then we just need more money in schools. We need better funding for extracurricular activities. We need better funding for outside school clubs. We need NHS to be connected more with schools, so schools can act as triage and then send students rapidly across for treatment. We need teachers to be trained in mental health so they can assess the signs and be early interventions, become early interventions for students. And then if we get all that right, then hopefully we're in a position where a student can alert a teacher through their actions or how they present. Teacher can refer to mental health lead. Mental health lead refers student to NHS. NHS sees them within a couple of days. They get treated. They come back and they love their after school club and they're really excited by all this stuff. And they come out as a really happy, well-rounded person. And that to me is really exciting because I think that's really possible. But you listen to politicians and it's like people have just lost sight of that vision. And that's the vision we should all be striving for, because that's so exciting and so lovely to imagine a world where we find that the good in every child and give them the opportunity to get treatment and get help and then go back and find what they love. Like that excites me because I think we'd solve so many of this country's problems by doing that. But it just feels like there's no spark left when the conversation about mental health comes up in from a policy perspective. But that for me, it's really exciting. It's what I think is massively important. And even saying it then, I'm like, it makes sense. Like that doesn't seem like it's completely unachievable.
And that's the thing. Like, I love the fact that Dr. Alex has kind of got the ear and is making change, and especially like his kind of post your pill and stuff. Like he's normalizing people's mental health, and that's the thing. If we don't solve the mental health issues of children at school, they are going to go and take it to places like uni, because like 50% of children go into uni, and they're then going to be in that place where they're on their own and they don't have as much support. And I was reading on your post, it's something like there's a suicide at university every 3 days. Is that right?
Yeah,
that's insane. Because my nephew's at school and at uni, my eldest one, and he's really struggling with his mental health. But it's also the cost of living out there. Obviously, his parents support him as much as they can, but there's this sudden kind of thing that how much kind of life costs and how much it costs to go out and do things and be social, and that pressure of uni life as well. You're kind of thrown into it on your own.
Yeah, I really struggled. Actually, I struggled for a lot of reasons. Firstly, because I wasn't very good at maths, and I turned up at uni to do aerospace engineering. So that was a fun learning curve, realizing that I really did not understand maths like many people did. But also, I was there during COVID, and I was in a flat, probably the size of most people's bathrooms, and it was absolutely tiny. And I locked down, within the first week of going back to uni. I was alone in that room for 10 days. It was pretty awful. And I'm someone that spent, at that point, I spent the last 4 years talking about mental health. I had a counsellor. Like I was pretty solid, pretty emotionally resilient, and I found that tough. And during that year of sort of turbulence at uni, I got message after message after message from people being like, my daughter's just taken her own life, my friend's just died, what do I do? It almost felt like just constant this just death everywhere. And it was really sad because it was people that were locked up in uni accommodation. Because I guess you carry that once you carry those problems into university, you get into a position where you do have the option to shut the door. And at uni, especially in the accommodation I was in, they're this big fire doors and they slam shut. And you have that door shut and you're just alone. You're so isolated, so physically isolated from everything. It's really a daunting place. And if you don't have those coping mechanisms in place and that sort of resilience and knowledge basis to go into, it's really, really tough. And then even if you get through the work, even the uni, you end up in the workplace. And the workplace, I mean, it feels like pot luck at the moment, whether you end up in a good company that deals with you well, or a bad company that really doesn't. And I work in hospitality. I do quite a lot of work with Wagamama, and they obviously, I love them. They're absolutely great. They take it so seriously. But you go into chefing, and some really stressful jobs, and it's just like we need to, we've almost missed the whole step in the learning process of all of these people, and you could have saved decades of suffering and struggling from just having those conversations. And I agree with you. I think it's all about teaching people how to cope, giving people healthy coping mechanisms, but also teaching them what they enjoy. I also volunteer for Shout, the crisis text line. So I have conversations all the time with people that are the worst end of the mental health spectrum, and almost all of the people on there are school age children. And you sort of go through conversations with these people who usually are suicidal, and I'm always surprised when you ask the question of, is there anything, once you've sort of taken them through and you've de-escalated it and you've let them sort of calm down and feel better, I try and ask, like, oh, is there anything you can do now once we finish talking that you enjoy? Like, what do you enjoy doing? And I'm absolutely struck every time by how few people actually can answer that question with something that's like a fun thing, like an actually good thing. So often it's like, oh, maybe I'll just like watch a movie, or I'll go on social media, or like listen to some music. And although I guess that's good because it's a distraction, it's like, I don't know. For me, I'd be like, oh, I'm just going to text a friend, see if we can go for a walk, or I'm going to just go like play tennis, or go for a run, or go for a walk. And sort of like this like fundamental foundation that they can fall back on doesn't exist, and they fall back on distraction, on movies and social media. And so I mean, we could have a whole hour and a half on social media, and and the absolute nightmare that is. And that's ironic because that's part of my major part of my job, but social media is just an absolute attention pit, that's just trying to steal your attention all the time. But every time I have these conversations, I'm struck by how little people realize about what makes them happy. And it makes me really sad, because those people are going to continue in a cycle, because they don't really have a way of escaping those negative thoughts and processing them properly. If they're just distracting themselves with movies and TV and stuff like that, and alcohol when people get older. A lot of people I work with have gone through serious problems with alcohol and drugs because of university, because they've gone to university with problems, and then the accessibility of drugs and alcohol has just been like a gift at the time that hasn't worked out to be so much of a gift.
And I think you hit it on the head, the fact that like a lot of them will just watch telly or listen to music, but they're not getting that dopamine hit from it. So they're not getting that kind of happy hormone that kind of will then de-stress you and de-escalate it. And it's like, I've talked about it on a previous show. I was in a domestic abuse situation. So, and my friend, with the best advice she gave me, she was like, work on yourself, make yourself happy, and then then you should be strong enough to leave. And it was doing the things that I did, and going for runs and working out, that I was giving myself this happy hormone, and I was able to build myself back up and get myself into a much more positive state. And actually, when I was left, I was absolutely fine, because I'd worked on myself and got myself into that position. And I think we're not giving the kids the tools. We're not also kind of explaining to them the importance of it, and kind of, right, if you that kind of thing. If you have a stressful day, just go and work out, or go and I've talked about this on another show where I talked about kind of how PE I think potentially needs to change. Like, we don't really teach kids about the gym, and actually we need to, especially girls, we need to show them how to use the gym properly and explain like the benefits of it, so they're not too scared or nervous to go into it. And actually if they can build that better relationship with exercise and kind of healthiness, then that the love of that kind of dopamine hit is going to kind of build them up and help them manage stress in a different way. And I do notice it, the kids that do go to the gym, because a lot of the GCSE lot will go to the gym because they'll talk. I think it's because I talk about my life too much, because I'm like, oh, I'm going to work out later, and they're like, yeah, me too, miss, I'm off to the gym, are you working out? And we have that like kind of, oh, I can't come to after school, miss, I've got gym tonight. And there's that kind of conversation with them, but they are the happier kids in school. They're the more bubbly kids. The ones that go and do that are the kids that have built those habits into them. So I can see that it does work. But there's nothing to say, like, we've got a kid that's obsessed with the war and he makes aeroplanes in his spare time. He's so happy in his little world making his aeroplanes and collecting memorabilia, and brings it in and shows it all and talks to us for hours. But it's what he loves. And it's one of those that if anybody says, oh, so-and-so said, you don't even need to know the student. People are like, is it that one? I'm like, yeah. It's like, oh, yeah, they talked to me yesterday. But we don't mind it because that's their thing. And I think it is the kids that have a thing, even if it's a weird thing, they are just happier. And there's that really difficult stage, isn't there, at school, where you don't know who you are and you don't quite know where you fit. And and you haven't found that thing that you click with, but there's all these pressures that you must do well in certain things. And like I said, it needs to be that there needs to be more openness into trying different things. And I think also like that kind of preparation for life, that it's okay to fail and it's okay to change your mind and change careers and change direction, as well as a really important kind of lesson to learn.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, talk about change direction. That's exactly what I did. Through school, my plan was to go and do aerospace engineering, which obviously its own issues, and then go into the army. Like, that was my plan, was go into the army. And I couldn't have been in a more different job, I don't think. And like that, but that's fine. Like, I found something I really enjoy. Like, I absolutely love what I do now. I get to meet amazing people, have really cool conversation with people, and do something that's really meaningful to me. But this isn't, and this goes back to a point I said earlier. Like, there exist so many jobs that you don't even know what they are, exist out there. And it's sort of like if you close your mind to fitting into the box that everyone else is in, then you are going to be unhappy, because you are not designed to do what these people are doing. And yeah, I think it's so important that people get the opportunity to explore. And so this thing about planes and collecting things, I mean, yeah, I'm sure that is deadly dull to hear about, but so amazing. So amazing. That person's found something they really love. And I just really hope that they never feel like they need to drop that to fit in with everyone else, because I think that's a real pressure in school as well, of having the same interests as other people. And I know that's what Sam struggled with, because, you know, if you don't like what other people like, you're probably going to drop what you like before you sort of drop them. And so, yeah, I think it's so important to give them the empowerment to go and explore things. And then exactly on the exercise thing, exercise is just absolutely vital. It's completely vital. Running, I'm a big I will just shout about running and how good running is. There's a book called Born to Run. It goes through sort of the history of a human being and how all of these, you know, Achilles tendon is the way it is because we are born to be endurance runners, and we stand up straight, and our rib cage is designed like it is because we are born and created as endurance runners, and our biological past was as people that ran and went long distances, and sort of that sort of slow paced running it's part of our DNA. And you know, we've got a population of kids, especially disadvantaged areas and disadvantaged kids, that are pretty sedentary and don't really move much. And you know, we know that even 5 minutes, even 30 seconds actually of exercise releases dopamine, it releases norepinephrine, which is a stress buster, it releases serotonin, it makes you feel happy, it makes you feel fulfilled, it makes you feel stress-free. It gives you the same impact as marijuana and opioids, right? And we've got it from literally moving our legs. I mean, what an amazing gift, or moving our body. And it's so important. and you meet people that have been on a sort of journey. And I know Bella Mackie, the author, she talks really openly about this, is like going through that depressive episode and then sort of finding exercise, and that's been the way through it, because you give yourself that release and that that place to go that releases those happy feel good chemicals. But also importantly, with the social media conversation, social media is acting on the dopamine pathway. So every time you scroll through social media, every time you like a post, every time someone likes your post, your brain releases dopamine. But just like any other drug, like the more it happens, the less your brain is receptive to that dopamine. So you'll need more and more to feel the same, right? So what's happened is basically we've got this whole generation of people that have had their dopamine receptors absolutely nuked by social media and all of this just loud stuff that's grabbing their attention all the time. So they find it incredibly firstly, they find it incredibly difficult to concentrate, which I think is one of the answers to what's happened since COVID to behavior, and to the general mental health of students. But also it makes finding stuff that fulfills them really quite hard. They have to work at it to find that same release. But I've literally just this afternoon been on a podcast and talked quite a long time about social media, and I just these are platforms that have been designed by with a lot of money, employing some very, very clever psychologists to create a psychologically addictive platform. I mean, I was in Vegas randomly about 3 weeks ago, and you scroll through social media, and what does it remind you of? It reminds you of slot machines. It's this never-ending cycle of stuff. It's designed with the same premise that a slot machine has, and we're basically putting it into the hands of really impressionable, young, developing people. I think it's just an absolute disaster that's got so big. But then again, like, I think there's benefits to social media. I have a job because of social media, but but I think it's really dangerous, and we have an issue there with that, because obviously they've started calling for. Or there's been a debate recently about phones in school. What's your opinion on phones in schools?
I mean, I'm a photography teacher, so my kids kind of need them a bit, but I do agree that actually not having them in schools would be a good thing, in the respect that they would talk to each other and not go and hide in the toilets to go check their phones. I mean, our school is quite strict on it; they're not allowed them out. But you do notice it that, like, when they're outside, as soon as they go to get the bus and stuff, you see them all standing outside the school on their phones next to each other, not talking to each other. So I do think in that respect, it can kind of widen that kind of oracy pathways. We've noticed that a lot of the oracy within the kids, they're not talking as much as they were, or have that lack of communication skill that they previously had because of COVID, and they've just not been talking to people as much. But it's interesting you say about the activity, because my tutor group, we used to, I've had them for a few years, they're now in year 10, and we used to, when they were in Key Stage 3, we used to have Sport Friday, so we'd all go play bench ball or dodgeball and have big competitions, and they're really into it. But now they're in year 10 and 11, it's like, no, they've got to do an extra study session. And I throw it out to them on Fridays. I'm like, should we go for a wellness walk? And if it's sunny, and they're like, yes. And we go and have a little wander around school together. But actually, it's my point as well to drop into them, and I get to kind of have little chats with all of them and kind of find out how they're going on. And that's their point, where they will tell me stuff. But it's also like, it's just nice to get out and do stuff. And I love it. The kids in primary schools do their daily mile and stuff, and I think we need that in secondary school. I think the point where they get stressed and their mental health declined is actually where we need it more than in the younger years.
I agree. And actually, one of the first things when I was at school, that was the first thing I really did after Sam died, was organise this charity walk, and got everyone from school to come along and do this massive walk. And it was, for me, I did DAV at school, or Duke of Edinburgh at school, and sort of like, from me and my friends, that was the only place that we ever really spoke about anything important or deep, was when we were on these walks. So I remember, like, we're in the middle of Dartmoor on this ridiculous, awful track, absolutely awful place, and we were talking about some really deep stuff, and stuff that, like, we'd never spoken about before. And it's because you're sort of outside, you're distracted, you feel you're, like, safe, and also, like, it feels very unconfrontational to have a conversation with someone while you're walking, because you're not looking at them. You can sort of look around and be distracted by things. it's a great thing to do, and it's great that so many primary schools are doing that. It really, really is, because you're giving people that ability to sort of understand that that's what is nice. Because it's not rocket science, this mental health stuff. It really isn't. Like, going for a walk is brilliant. Like, if you're having a bad day, going for a walk will probably change your day, and it will give you the time and space to actually start processing some things and thinking about things. Like, it's really not rocket science. So I think that's a great thing to give people, and so good that you do it with your class. And then also it gives them the opportunity to have those conversations with you, because I think, especially with mental health, there's this real push. We hear it all the time, right? This whole talk about your mental health, and it makes something that's really complex quite simple, when actually I think it's less about telling people to talk, but actually about trying to create environments and situations where people want to talk. And so going for a walk and inviting people out like that, it's a great way of actually not telling anyone what they've got to do, but actually just giving them the opportunity to. And if they want to take it, they'll take it. But if they don't, then they don't have to. I think that's a brilliant thing to do, and it would have such a benefit to people. But again, I mean, we talk about like the pressures that school face. I don't know if it's changed since I was there, but I can't imagine there being much wiggle room in the timetable to get the whole school out on a walk.
No,
but,
it would be amazing though. But yeah,
it would be so amazing.
You see it on sports day, but it's one day of the year, isn't it?
Yeah.
Unfortunately. Yeah. I've kept you way longer than you said you'd give me, so I just want to say thank you very much for joining me. It's been a great conversation, and I think really it's one that people kind of do shy away from and don't talk about it enough. And there is that gap, that opportunity for education to change and make room for it, and do a service for the students that can really impact them and have a change. And I think we've given lots of kind of strategies for people to consider and think about, especially if there's kids that you're worried about in your classes, to use. And yeah, I just want to say thank you, because it's not an easy conversation to have and share your experiences, but yeah, so I'm excited to see what else you do and how much you can change, and especially with the stuff with the universities, because I think it needs somebody to shout for them.
Thank you, Hannah. No, it's been really, really good chatting to you. It's a really important conversation. You're right. It's not easy, but it's the only way things are going to change is by us sort of having these conversations. And it'd be really good to stay in touch and hopefully work together on some school stuff, because I think it's just someone needs to be sticking up for schools and trying to help this get improved, because it doesn't feel like anyone in the House of Parliament particularly care. But anyway, it was really, really great to be here. Really great conversation, and thank you so much for having me on, Hannah.
Thank you so much. Thanks for joining me. Have a lovely evening.
You too.
If anybody has any questions or anything they want to ask, or any experiences they want to do, you're welcome to call in or add in your comments. I'm going to play the news, and then we're going to discuss some of those shortly.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishing professional development books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Have you checked out their latest releases? Use the code JCTTR2324 for 20% off your order. Don't miss out. Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading.
In today's educational environment, students and teachers are juggling a mix of face-to-face, online and blended learning courses. Canvas by Instructure helps teachers navigate these diverse learning experiences with a user-friendly virtual learning environment that offers flexible access to courses and a consistent learning experience, all while streamlining everyday teaching processes. The world's best schools and universities are using Canvas to create dynamic courses, collaborate seamlessly, and access actionable data that drives student success.
On the 24th to the 26th of January 2024, Bet UK is back, and even better for educators. New for 2024, Table Talks empowers educators to collaborate openly and connect deeply with like-minded individuals in the education space, as well as tech user labs, the brilliant new tutorials and working groups at Bet, where technology users will learn how to get more out of their institution's tech from the top education technology experts in the world. Whatever your goal, You'll find it at BET 2024. Educators go free. Get your tickets today at www.uk.betshow.com/visitor-registration.
This is Teachers Talk Radio, and this is Teachers Talk Radio News.
The BBC News website reports on announcements that GCSE students in England will get formulae and equations in their maths and science exams for summer 2024. The Department for Education has asked the exam regulator to extend previous support for another year to limit the impact of COVID. Most students who were due to sit GCSE exams next summer were in Year 7 when the first lockdown began. Teaching unions have welcomed the proposal, which is being consulted on. The DfE said it would mean enhanced formulae and equation sheets for pupils in maths, physics and combined science. Education Secretary Gillian Keegan said these pupils will be the last to experience 2 years of national closures during secondary school, and that it was right that they get additional support. She went on to say it was disappointing that the decision had been made so late on, as many pupils will take mocks in the coming months or so. The union ASCL welcomed the consultation, but argued that the provision of support materials should be permitted as it would reduce some of the stress of exam preparation and allow pupils to focus on core knowledge and skills. Prior to this announcement, exams in England had been due to return to 2019 arrangements. Exams were cancelled across the UK in 2020 and 2021, and grades were based on teacher assessments. When students returned to exam halls in 2022, they were given extra support. Some measures remained in place for exams in England in 2023, with exams in the same subject spaced more apart, formulae and equation sheets in some subjects, and not being tested on unfamiliar vocabulary in modern foreign languages. But, unlike the rest of the UK, students in England were not given information on topics on which they were being tested. England was also the only nation this summer to bring back in line with 2019, with Wales and Northern Ireland planning a slow return. As a result, the drop in pass grades was steepest in England. In another week of political drama, the latest government reshuffle has seen the return of many familiar faces. For education, it means the return of former Education Secretary Damien Hinds as Schools Minister. He replaces Nick Gibb, who resigned to pursue a job in the diplomatic service. A report in FE Week focuses on Hinds' previous experience leading the DfE between January 2019 and July 2019, during which time the government completed reforms to technical education. Hinds has previously said, after his 2019 departure, that there was still work to do on social mobility. He was replaced by Gavin Williamson. The Education Secretary stated Mr Hinds is hugely experienced and who would continue to build on Nick Gibb's record of driving up standards. Mr Hinds is the sixth person to hold the Schools Minister role in 18 months. The Glasgow Times reports on what it calls the long-term decline in education standards after the Institute of Fiscal Studies looked at Scotland's disappointing history in PISA figures, an international measure. Since 2012, Scottish scores in maths and science have declined. The figures also show a wide gap between the richest and poorest in maths, science and reading, but more well-off students also underperform when compared to their English counterparts. Large increases in spending and big reforms such as the Curriculum for Excellence do not seem to have translated into higher performance, according to Andrew McKendrick, one of the report's authors. A Scottish Conservative education spokesman said the report should act as a wake-up call for the SNP, and Scottish Labour said it exposed the damage the SNP has done. Finally, Schools Week reports on the invitation to schools to request a free portrait of King Charles II under a new government scheme. The scheme is costing £8 million. Those wishing to take up the offer must apply before the 2nd of February 2024. The King will be shown in ceremonial dress and delivery of the images will take place between February and April next year. The A3 size picture will be printed on high-quality paper and be in a glazed frame. Schools which display pictures of Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth will not be obliged to take down her portrait. Suggested placement of the image of His Majesty is reception areas or a function room or similar location. Schools will not be able to see the portrait before submitting requests. The image is not being funded from school budgets, but out of a separate pot similar to the scheme which provided a free book to every primary school pupil to mark the Queen's Platinum. This has been your Teachers Talk Radio News with Jo Fox.
Thank you for joining me tonight. Tonight's been a really interesting one. It's obviously since one of my students committed suicide, I have found the whole idea of student mental health quite interesting, and how we can improve it for our students, especially with family members and things like that. Everybody knows somebody else that's struggling, and I think that's the thing that we've kind of discovered a bit tonight, that actually a lot of it is making the students feel that they're not alone and that it is normal to feel like that, and then to understand their emotions and how to change that. But looking at statistics, so this is from Young Minds. So this is data from the Office of National Statistics, which was analysed by Young Minds. The suicide rate among young people aged 15 to 19 in England rose by 35% from 20 to 21. In 2020, 147 young people in England took their own lives, and this rose to 198 in 2021. And this is the highest number in over 30 years. Obviously, we don't have the data for 2022 yet, but I just think this is something that's going to become further and going to go more, and we're going to have to deal with it more as teachers. And I remember actually when I was at school, my teacher saying to us that it was on our last week of school, and he said it's very rare that a cohort goes 5 years and you go 5 years at school without there being a death. And then unfortunately my friend died. It wasn't a mental health death, but that's always stayed with me. And actually I've had it throughout my career. I've never gone 5 years of my teaching career without having the death of a student. And that's kind of stayed with me, that we are going to be in these situations where students are in those situations, and we have to be the people and be, so you can't put it all on you. There's that thing as well, that we are just teachers, and same with the people, the mental health support workers in the school. They are only one person. You can't do everyone at the same time. It's just not physically possible. And there's the ones that are shouting the loudest, that need the attention. There's also the quiet ones, so don't forget the quiet ones. Make sure you notice them in your classroom. And it's really important that we're kind of really considering how we can change this for our students. And the little things that we've discussed tonight are just important kind of tools and little things that we can do, that granted that they might not help them flourish in English and maths, but they will help them in being better humans and being better people and managing themselves better, and they will give them more life skills. If we can make our students happier, isn't that the end goal when they leave as well? There was the article I read earlier about from the Guardian that was written by Sarah Marshall. She discussed a study that was done of 19,000 young people from the millennium, and they were tracked from the millennium. And in that, they was also discussed it with a Dr. Priyanka Dickey, who's chair of the Royal College of Psychiatrists Children's and Adolescent Mental Health Facility. She said that she's really concerned by the findings, and this was back in 2001, and she said it is going to only get worse. In it, she said about the NHS data showed that 41% of all admissions to hospitals for self-harm were teenagers. And we need to consider kind of that impact. Like we're having an impact on the NHS. That's a huge amount of the self-harms being from teenagers, and we need to make sure that we're giving these kids the tools to be able to manage themselves so they don't get there. I mean, obviously there's some great places. I've just mentioned Young Minds. Kooth, I mentioned at the start, is an app which students can have, a free app. I highly recommend you recommend that to any students that are struggling. Promote that as much as you can in your schools, because students can log on free and talk to somebody. Obviously there's Samaritans as well, and we do have lots of great resources available as well. So obviously there's Young Mind Crisis Messenger as well, so you can text them and they'll get in contact. And it's just really important that we have these resources and we make them available to students, so students know where to go and know where to get help, but also that we're kind of giving them those strategies. And it is going to be an increased thing that's going to happen in schools. And I think unless schools get on top of it and start considering how they can manage it, then it is only going to get worse. And it is really difficult. We are teachers and we are meant to teach, and we've got so much that we have to do in our day to day in our classroom. But I think this needs to be top of your list. Get those connections with those students. Ask them about their hobbies and things, because that's like Ben said, that's quite an easy thing to actually talk about with kids. And actually, if you work out that they don't have hobbies, they're maybe the ones that we need to prioritise and think about. So think about the things that you could maybe even do in a school survey or a school voice that could help you as a school kind of identify things, or then be able to potentially put things into action to be able to help those students and help them find support and find different places and different ways to support themselves. I just think it's such an important thing, and we all those who shout loudest are heard most. So I think as a community, as teachers, we need to shout louder to the government that we need more help. I mean, CAMHS is on its knees and it's taking forever to get the kids referred to. Of schools having mental health workers in it, that's not anywhere near. It needs to be 100%. And we need to do that. Otherwise, we're doing a disservice to our students. We need the government to step up and provide that for our students and make sure they're getting the support that they need. So thank you very much for listening on this Wednesday night, slightly different night for me. And thank you very much for Ben West for joining me and talking about his experiences. If you want to follow him on Instagram, he is I am Ben West. So you can find him on there. So thank you very much for listening to the show, and I hope you have a lovely week.
This show is brought to you in partnership with John Catt Educational, publishing professional development books and resources to support great teaching and learning in schools around the world. Have you checked out their latest releases? Use the code JCTTR2324 for 20% off your order. Don't miss out. Visit johncattbookshop.com to explore their full range of titles and advance your own professional development today. Happy reading.
In today's educational environment, students and teachers are juggling a mix of face-to-face, online and blended learning courses. Canvas by Instructure helps teachers navigate these diverse learning experiences with a user-friendly virtual learning environment that offers flexible access to courses and a consistent learning experience, all while streamlining everyday teaching processes. The world's best schools and universities are using Canvas to create dynamic courses, collaborate seamlessly, and access actionable data that drives student success.
On the 24th to the 26th of January 2024, Bet UK is back, and even better for educators. New for 2024, Table Talks empowers educators to collaborate openly and connect deeply with like-minded individuals in the education space, as well as tech user labs, the brilliant new tutorials and working groups at Bet, where technology users will learn how to get more out of their institution's tech from the top education technology experts in the world. Whatever your goal, you'll find it at Bet 2024. Educators go free. Get your tickets today at www.uk.betshow.com/visitor-registration.
You've been listening to Teachers Talk Radio. Tune in live and listen back at ttradio.org. We look forward to hearing from you next time on Teachers Talk Radio.